Okay, so this is the fourth video of Unit 5 on psychoactive drugs. The information can be found in your textbook on pages 197 to 210. The big ideas we will talk about here is tolerance, withdrawal, addiction. And then we'll talk about the three categories that you need to know: depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. Okay, so first let's get an understanding of what psychoactive drugs are. They're chemical substances that alter our perceptions, moods, or behaviors through their actions at the actual neural impulses. So it's going to change a little bit of your brain chemistry. It is an induced altered state of consciousness, and like I talked about before, the three categories in this are depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. Let's get to some basic vocabulary. Tolerance, withdrawal, and addiction. First one we'll take a look at is tolerance. Tolerance is with repeated exposure to a psychoactive drug, the drug's effectiveness lessens. Thus, it takes bigger doses to get the desired effect. So when I started college, I used to drink maybe a cup of coffee a morning. Okay, and by the end of my freshman year, I was drinking 3 cups of coffee to get the same dosage or the same effects. Right, so what it is a reduced responsiveness to a drug, prompting the user to larger dosage to achieve the same pleasurable effect that a smaller dosage does. As the user's brain adapts its chemistry to offset the drug use, that's kind of what's taking place. This is known as neural adaptation. So if you take a look at the little picture here, you can see January 1st, the little man is taking 1 pill, and then by May 12th, he's taking the whole jar, okay, to get the same effects. Okay, so 3 basic terms for psychoactive drugs you should pay attention to is, in your packet, it's tolerance. We'll talk about withdrawals that you could experience, and then addiction with psychoactive drugs. Withdrawals are discomfort and distress that follow when a person who is dependent on a drug discontinues the use of the drug. So your body's going to go through physical and psychological withdrawals. The physical ones are where your body actually feels pain and intense cravings. Psychological is more the emotional, mental, or stressful experience you may encounter. So if I stopped drinking coffee, I may begin to have a little bit of physical shakes or a twitch. And then psychologically, I might become really moody because I don't have my coffee in the morning. Addiction is a compulsive craving for a substance despite the adverse consequences, and often with physical symptoms that follow it. So you have nausea, distress because you're withdrawal. So you have this huge craving for something, and if you don't fulfill it, okay, you're going to go through withdrawal symptoms, and it occurs over and over and over again. 90 million people suffer from such problems related to alcohol and other drugs, according to the World Health Organization. Now, we're pretty much just talking about psychoactive drugs and addiction at this point in time. Okay, we will talk about what constitutes as an addiction, and if we have too many classifications of like other things that you could be addicted to, like social media, but we're not talking about that at this point in time. We're just talking about drug use. Okay, there are some common drug myths out there that your book talked about. First one, addictive drugs quickly corrupt. For example, morphine taken to control pain is powerfully addictive and often leads to heroin. Okay, that's a myth, all right? Depending on the person you are, you could be exposed to morphine, okay, for an injury, and you might take it once or twice and be totally fine, not addicted to it. However, some people have addictive tendencies where they begin to depend on it and need it more and more and more, and that could be kind of like a gateway into other drugs. Addictions can be overcome voluntarily. Therapy is required. Okay, this is number 2. Addictions need to be understood by the person in which is addicted. They need to take control of their life. Whether it's through therapy or not, they need to understand the addiction, and they need to be willing to make the change. Sometimes therapy does not help. Sometimes they can overcome it by themselves. And then the third one, we can extend the concept of addiction to cover not just drug dependencies, but a wide spectrum of repetitive pleasure-seeking behaviors. But should we? Again, this is leading back to what should be considered addiction. Should it be considered everything? Should it be considered things like internet addiction, or should it just be considered psychoactive drugs? At this point, we're going to leave it at psychoactive drugs. Okay, so the Categories I talked about before are depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. First one we're going to take a look at is depressants. Depressants are drugs that reduce neural activity and slow down your body. Okay, slow down your heartbeat, slow down your brain activity. Alcohol is a depressant. Some people think it's a stimulant because people get excited and they get silly, but it's actually slowing down your functioning. Barbiturates are tranquilizers. Again, they're going to slow you down. And opiates is another depressant. Let's first talk about alcohol. Alcohol is found in beer, wine, and liquor. It's the second most used psychoactive drug besides caffeine. Caffeine is number 1. Okay, it's slow neural processing. Okay, low doses of alcohol can relax the drinker by slowing down their sympathetic nervous system. Okay, it is associated with slurred speech, slow thinking, and impairs your physical activity. Okay, other alcohol basics. Alcohol impairs the parts of the body responsible for controlling inhibitions and making judgments. So that thought center, okay, it's going to impair. It's also going to impair your cerebellum, balance. Okay, studies have shown that alcohol impairs memory by suppressing the processing of events into long-term memory. So that sorting phase that happens during REM, okay, it impairs that ability for you to sort information. And it reduces self-awareness. Okay, blood alcohol content, often known as your BAC, measures how much alcohol is in a person's bloodstream. Okay, so if you ever have to do a breathalyzer test, the BAC of 0.8 is considered legal intoxication in most states. Okay, above that, usually you can start to get situations where you're driving illegally. Okay, alcohol and memory. Memory disruption occurs. Alcohol disrupts the process of recent experiences into long-term memory. I kind of talked about that before. They studied rats that they exposed to alcohol, and they saw a diminish in neural connections and death of brain cells. Okay, they also saw in excess binge drinking. They examined an MRI of somebody who was before they binge drank and then after, in terms of the different experiences that they had with drinking. And they saw a deterioration of that cortex, so the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, stuff that we need for higher level thinking. A correlation that your book mentions where one behavior goes up, the other goes up, could be a positive correlation, which they noticed with risky behavior is sex and drinking. Okay, they studied 600 studies, have explored a link between the behaviors. An overwhelming majority of people that were drinking were more prone to exhibit this type of behavior, which your book talks a lot about. Alcohol plus sex can create the perfect storm. Not such good things can happen when these two things are coming into combination. Okay, barbiturates. Barbiturates are drugs or tranquilizers that mimic the effects of alcohol. A lot of times these are depressants used for sedation, and they help with the nervous system. Nebuterol, Secol, and Amytal induce sleep or reduce anxiety. These are just examples that were mentioned in your book. Large doses can impair your memory or judgment, but they do help sometimes with anxiety that slows your body down. Okay, opiates, opium, and its derivatives such as morphine and heroin, they depress the neural activity and temporary lessening pain and anxiety. A form of opiates is heroin. Usually what happens to your body is your pupils constrict, your breathing slows, and lethargy sets in. You become really, really tired. It has a short-term pleasure, but then leads to you where you need craving more and more and more. When flooding the brain with opiates, the brain actually stops producing their form of opiates, which is endorphins. So it's actually going to have physical changes in your body where your body's going to stop producing endorphins that help you with pain, and you're now going to be dependent on this. Okay, another category is stimulants. Stimulants temporarily excite the neural activity and cause arousal in the body functions. They often used to stay awake, lose weight, or boost mood performance. Amphetamines and meth, ecstasy, caffeine, and nicotine are all examples of stimulants. Ecstasy, also called MDMA. This is a hallucinogenic stimulant which produces lower inhibitions, pleasant feelings, and greater acceptance of others. Sometimes classified as a stimulant because it gives you a boost of energy, but it also is a hallucinogen because you think things that aren't there. It triggers a dopamine release and a serotonin release, and it blocks the reabsorption of these, creating you with a high. Usually lasts about 3 to 4 hours. It does have dehydration effects on your body in terms of physical effects. It can have long-term effects on serotonin where you don't feel a sense of happiness or excitement anymore. Those are no longer released naturally. And even moderate users may experience permanent brain damage, statistics have said. So even once or twice can cause you to have some permanent brain issues. Hallucinogens are the distortions of perceptions and invoke sensory images in the absence of sensory input. So you see things or hear things that aren't there. LSD is a very popular form of an hallucinogenic drug. It's also known as acid. The effects vary from person to person, but users can be dangerous to themselves and others because they don't know what's real and not real. Okay, you may see various shapes and sizes of different things and colors that are in your environment, things floating in the air, create sensory images that are not present. Very scary drug to be kind of situated with. Marijuana is also known as an hallucinogen. Okay, you can find these in leaves, stems, resin, and flowers. From the hemp plant that, when smoked, lower inhibitions and produces a feeling of relaxation and mild euphoria. So you can start seeing things that aren't there. It also is a relaxant in terms of understanding it. THC, or delta-9 trihydrocannabinol, is the active ingredient in, and it disrupts memory and lung damage from smoke. Okay, so they are seeing signs of how this is an addictive drug and it is causing some issues with memory. Here's a nice guide that I would make sure you know or jot down. It talks about the different types, the depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogen. It talks about the effects, and it talks about the adverse effects. I would copy this down. I would know it. I would make sure you have all the notes that link to all the different drugs. Okay, and then to recap, tolerance, withdrawal, and addiction were discussed, the different types of stimulants, depressants, and hallucinogens. I didn't talk about the effects of the biopsychosocial, which you may want to take a look at for the test, which is on pages 208 to 210. We will also be discussing them in class, but I would make sure you have an understanding of the different biopsychosocial implications of drugs.